everyone and welcome to Great Deltan. Today we are going to be starting on the scenery which is going to fill this area here, following on from the completion of the countryside cutting. Initially I didn't have any plans for this area. I was just going to leave it as grassland or some sort of countryside, because obviously when I started this layout I didn't want to go into too much detail. But then I thought it might look a bit plain and perhaps I could just do something of scenic interest here. So I stuck a poll out on my Facebook page and I let the followers and people who like the page decide what to put here. Some of the options were tennis courts, a go-karting track, a BMX track, farm, small housing cul-de-sac, or just leave it plain. And the overwhelming response was a go-karting track, and I'm happy with that because that's what I had in mind that I wanted to build here anyway. I just wasn't sure if it would fit quite right. Just south of the M1 on the Northampton Loop Line is a BMX track, so it's sort of similar. And in the Northamptonshire area there is Wilton Locks, which contains a go-karting track. So it sort of keeps with the persona of the whole West Coast Main Line Northamptonshire area, which I'm trying to replicate. So yes, we will be building a go-karting track. It's something I don't often see very modelled, and I think it would be quite fun to make. But we're going to go one step further with that because we're going to actually make it in motion, and we're going to be doing that using Magnorail. For anyone who is unfamiliar with the Magnorail system, it is a series of tracks which then form a channel, and inside that channel you have a chain which runs around. In that chain you will have magnets embedded in it, and then you will stick your surface on the top of this track, and then you will have magnets which are attached to sliders, and then obviously the magnets attract to the magnets in the chain and it looks like it's going around by itself. I have used Magnorail in the past on my original layout to create a moving road, which worked pretty well, although with N Gauge it wasn't quite as good as I'd hoped. It was a bit jumpy. I couldn't put too many cars on it, otherwise it would just get a bit jerky. But with this I'm hoping it's going to work a lot better because I'm going to have a shorter run. There is a few corners, but I have the return loops to account for that, so there should be a lot less resistance. And because this whole area fits onto an A1 sort of sheet of paper, I won't need any joints in the paper. I can just lay one sheet on top and it's going to be quite smooth, and there should be a lot less resistance. Also, the fact that I'm not going to be trying to drag, say, 10-12 vehicles which are metal die cast, I'm just going to be dragging some little 3D printed go-karts which I have, which probably weigh less than 10 grams each. So that's also a benefit. So let's just take a quick look as what you get inside the Magnorail kit. This is an advanced vehicle starter kit, and what you get is your motor mounting frame. This works by having a motor mounted one side, and these little cogs drive two wheels which are coated with rubber, and then they drive the chain. You get a 12 volt DC motor. You do not get a power supply with this, which I find a bit odd. You have to buy that separately. You can buy one on the Magnorail website, however it's about £35, so I've just ordered an £8 one from Amazon. That'll be here in a day or two. And then here is your sections of track, and then you've got the chain which is all printed onto a sprue, so that all needs to be cut out and filed. And then you've got a couple of return loops. You have the sliders and a drill bit which is used for drilling holes in cars to allow the sliders to actually hook onto the car. I won't be using these because they're too big for the go-karts. I will explain how I will be mounting the magnets on the go-karts when we get to it. And then you've got more sections of track and some chain, and the same again. You also have the instruction booklet, which is obviously helpful if you're a first-time Magnorail user. What I also have is a return loop extension kit. Because of the nature of my circuit, it has a lot of tight curves, and I'd rather not be doing that with the track because it's going to form more resistance. This was £35, the starter kit was £170, so all in all a total cost of £205. On top of that we have the power supply, and then we have this, which is a DC motor controller, which I bought from Amazon for £7, because you do not get a variable speed with just a power supply, so you need some way to control it and slow it down, otherwise they would be going around the corners at the speed of light. So let me talk you through the plan that I have drawn out on this baseboard, which is now heavily covered in plaster mould dust. Over here will be a sort of headquarters, the main building where the reception will be, where people will get into their go-karting suits, put the helmets on, have their inductions, you know, all the sort of things you usually do. There might be a little cafe in there, I haven't decided yet. I have ordered some Graham Farris Scenecraft buildings to go in this area. So they will be in the second part of the video. The first part will just be creating the Magnorail go-karting track. We'll have a little seating area here, and over there will just be a car park. Onto the actual track, this will be the start. Over here will be where the go-karts are parked up when they're not in use, so sort of that will just overlap onto here. All of these corners here should be able to be done using the actual track and not the extension, the return loops. They're just about broad enough to allow that to be done. And then we should come around here, again using just the track. Hopefully I have actually enough track for this. And then there will be 1, 2, 3 and 4 return loops for those tight corners. And then we should obviously come back to the beginning. Now, Magnorail used to be very difficult to buy. You only used to be able to get it from Germany or from France. Anywhere in Europe, really. It wasn't available in the UK, which meant you had to pay quite a hefty customs fee to get it in the country, as I experienced when I use it on the Mark 1 layout. However, there is now an exclusive UK retailer of Magnorail, and I will leave a link in the description should anybody wish to try it. So it's a lot easier to buy now. Now, there are two methods you can use when laying Magnorail. You can obviously screw the track down using these little tabs with holes in, which are specifically for that, and using the screws provided in the set, and then you will build up the base around it to match the height of the track, and then stick your surface over the top. I find that cork strips, the same as Everard Junction had used, work pretty well. They're just a tad thin. Not very noticeable, but they do actually make the surface bow around where the track is, because it's ever so slightly higher than the cork strips. So for this I'm going to be using the other option, which is actually to drill, or well, route a channel where you want the track, and then cut off all these tabs and then just glue the track directly into this channel, and then you will obviously stick the surface over the top. The advantage of that being you don't actually need to fill in all the gaps where you're trying to build up the surface, because you're just routing the exact channel you want. It'll be quite a snug fit, and obviously then you don't have to work on building all the surface around it. So we're going to be trying that. The first thing I'm going to do, however, is actually screw down the track so I know exactly that these curves work, and that all the return loops are in the right place, and the motor mount is going to be in the right place as well. And then I shall draw around that, colour that track in, and then I know exactly where I need to route out. So we're going to get on with that, and then I will join you when that's all finished and the track has been embedded into this board. Right, welcome back. I didn't have enough track to complete the whole circuit which I had drawn out, so I've made it a bit shorter. Otherwise, if I started adding track from the expansion kits, then the chances are that one motor isn't going to drive the entire chain. It's going to be too long, and then I'd have to add another motor, and then that's another £60. So it's just easier to just shorten it and make do with what I've got. I've had to use these two little extension bits, which are actually the adapter pieces of track for the motor plate, because you get a lot of them extra because they just print the same sprue over and over again. But they work just the same, and then that's going to work as it is now. So the next job is to draw around all this, and then cut it all out, and then embed it all, cut off all these tabs, and hopefully it should be nice and comfortable in there, so we can get a chain on and then test it. Just quickly before I start the routing, I need to adjust the depth of the plunger to be correct with the track. So I'll just sit it on top of the track, and then I'll push it down and lock it in place when it's flush. That way I know I'm going to be cutting to the right depth. Perfect. Okay, that's all nicely embedded in the wood, and if I run my finger along it, it is pretty much flush. So I'm more than happy with that. Now I'm almost ready to stick this in permanently, but before I do that I'm going to have to assemble this motor unit and cut out all the necessary holes to accommodate that. So I will show you how that's done, if I can remember without the instructions. Right, so the pieces of this motor assembly are the mounting frame here. We have our DC motor. These are two gears which came as part of that sprue which I have cut off. I just need to take off the little legs and file them smooth. We have this collet sort of thing, and then we have a couple of O-rings which provide the main traction for the chain, and this spacer here. So let's take all of this out. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is slot the motor into the right place, and that just goes in here, and then there are a couple of screws which pop in these holes and line up with some threaded inserts on top of the motor. Sorry, everything's still a bit dusty from the wood routing. Right, with a bit of fiddling around, those screws are now in and tight, so then we can add this sprocket onto the motor assembly, I think. So just looking at the instructions to confirm that, yep. This one slots on here. This one has a flat edge which provides drive from the motor to the gear. Very tight fit, which is handy. And then if you're able to look down that, you'll see that the cog provides the channel with clearance. We can then put this spacer on here, or bush if you like, and then add the second one, which is a nice tight fit. And then we just need to add the O-rings. I can't remember what that's for, I'll have a look in a minute. We have the two O-rings, and then we have our drive unit. That just slots in there to hold that bush in place. And we have our drive unit. So the next thing I need to do is just drill a hole in the baseboard to accommodate this motor. I think it's about a 25mm hole. Simple hole saw will do the job. So I'll go find that quickly. Now hopefully with some luck that should be able to just slide down right in there and the motor will fit. And I need to root out a bit more because the gears are slightly wider. Right, I hope that fits now, as I don't want to be making too much noise this time of night. All the moths seem to have flown in. Right, that's good. Only minor issue is it has no support, so it's really being held up by these clips and the rest of the track. But providing those clips stay in place, that shouldn't be an issue. Okay, so we're now actually ready to glue this track in. Now the beauty of Magnorail, unlike railway track, once it's got scenery in it, it generally can't be reused. But providing not too much adhesive is used, this is fully reusable, so that's what I plan to do in the hopes of using it on a future layout. So I'm just going to be doing a few dabs of glue. The main reason is to keep it just in place and down. Because I've actually rooted out the entire shape of the track, it shouldn't shift around too much, even with the force of pushing the go-karts around the track. So I'm hoping that's going to be not a problem. So I'm just going to put a few dabs of glue around, and then I'll use some weights just to keep it flush with the top of the board. So I'll just give the track a quick hoover to get rid of any dust that has accumulated. For the glue, I'm just going to use this Gorilla Glue, which I use for everything. It's not just a wood glue, it's handy at sticking pretty much anything to anything. And I seem to have quite a lot of it for some reason. So I'll just put a few dots here and there. Now because this is MDF, it's not going to be the strongest bond in the world, but it should be sufficient just to keep it down. Right, I'm going to leave that to dry for about 24 hours now, and when I come back that should be nice, dry and sturdy in place. It's not going to move, and I can file down any small glue blobs which might have squeezed their way through these little gaps in the chuck. In the meantime, I can get started on preparing the chain. Right, here's the chain, and just like the tracks, it's printed out on a sprue, so every single link needs to be broken off and filed round in order for it to successfully navigate the track without any issues. There's quite a few different sections you can choose from depending on what kind of slider you want to use. I will be using these ones for the go-karts. It has a square insert and a circle insert, which are two magnets close together. I'm not actually going to be using the sliders because they're used for vehicles which have turning wheels, and you essentially pull along the vehicle with the slider and you hook it up into the vehicle. But I'll show you what I have. These are, if it will focus, 3D printed go-karts from 3D Wagon Works, and they're quite small, they're very light, and essentially the magnets will just be stuck to the bottom of these and they will go around the track. They're too small to try and get the wheels turning, but you wouldn't really notice it anyway because of the fine scale. So I'm going to make up my my chain, and I also need to decide where the go-karts are going to go. Originally I had intended to just have one after another. I think I'm going to try and get 8 at least. That'll look quite good. But then I realised it might look quite a lot better if I have, say, 1 or 2 at the front who are obviously leading the race, and then we'll have them sort of scattered behind, and then there may be one right at the back who has perhaps spun out and is trying to get himself back in the race. So they'll be nice and staggered within a sort of 30 centimetre length. Right, I have here my 10 links of which the magnets are embedded, and they shall drive the go-karts. Originally I was going to use just these pieces, which are separate on the sprue. They're different from the rest, and you can embed the magnets in one of these 3 holes. However, I only get 10 of these cylindrical magnets, so if I use those I'd only have 5 go-karts. So I'm just about able to get a magnet in this shorter section, one of the square ones that you get, which you also get 10 of, and then a cylindrical magnet in the front, and it's just about long enough for the go-kart to stretch over. So I should be able to put one magnet under the front of the go-kart and another one at the back. That will stop them from turning round as they're being driven and make sure that they actually drive straight. And it should have a fair bit of attraction because these magnets are a fair bit stronger than those. So now I'm going to build up the chain fully and spread these out among them, and then I'll get back to you when that is in the track and ready for a test run. Right, we are now ready for a test run. I have finished the chain, and it took quite a while because of the amount of links I had. I ended up with not too many spares left at all, so we just got the right amount. I have plugged in the 12 volt power supply, and then that goes to my DC motor controller. 2 wires in, 2 wires out for the motor, which is obviously over there. So I'm just going to run it slowly to prevent any accidents. I've got these pots just sitting on the return loops because these discs have a tendency to pop out when there's nothing above them like a road surface, so we'll just take it easy. What I'm looking for is kinks in the chain, certain links not turning, whether the chain pops out between these rubber wheels, and of course just to make sure it runs nice and smoothly. Just turn it up a little bit. This can get quite noisy, but everything looks okay so far. I'm glad that the one motor is running this entire circuit. Obviously it's going to be a bit different when the surface is on top, and these magnets will be attracted to the go-karts on the top, and they'll be forming a bit of resistance. But so far so good, which I'm happy with. Just going to run that for about 2 or 3 minutes to let the links settle in. That'll also help them rub against each other and deburr themselves. Some areas are a little bit jumpy, so I might need to shorten the chain. I can always do that by putting in a shorter link. Right, I've been doing a bit of experimenting to find out how valid this project actually is, and I've run into a couple of issues, but I have overcome them. And what we have here is our first test driver. Underneath him is a strip of plastic card with the 2 magnets stuck to that. Originally I just put the magnet straight on the card and the wheels wouldn't actually turn the chain, there was that much resistance. So what I've got is a piece of this plastic card here, which is quite thin, but it's glossy on one side, which makes for good slip. And I've run it a couple of times round, and I'm going to show you it now because it's running okay. I'm not sure how many more go-karts I'm going to be able to put on before it starts to slip though. It will get better in time as the card wears down. This card isn't overly thick, but it's got a bit of a rough surface to it, so as that smooths down I should be able to add more go-karts. But just for now, I shall let you enjoy this piece of footage. So that is actually working quite well. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stick this piece of card down permanently, and then I will work on trying to get as many go-karts to work on it as possible, and then that is the Magnorail side of things pretty much done. We can then start working on the scenery. Right, I'll tell you where I'm at. Over the last few days I've been doing a bit of trial and error with trying to get these sliders to run. I have made up some sliders. They're just made out of some plastic card with the 2 magnets stuck onto it, and that is the length of the go-kart. And they have not been running very well. I done away with the white card and I put some black card on it because the colour is better for when the paint wears down, and it's also slightly thicker, which means there's less magnetic attraction between the ones that are embedded in the chain and the magnets on the sliders. That should in theory make it easier for these rollers to push the chain round, but I just cannot get the sliders to run around this corner. I even can't get one to go around it. It always stops and it just judders, and I think the reason for that is because these sides are obviously stationary, so when the magnet is pulling up the chain, it's obviously pulling against the sides, the tracks, whereas on these return loops these wheels turn around so it runs with the chain. On tight corners like this you're just adding a lot of extra drag onto the chain. So I've had to rip off that card, and I'm going to have to sort of do quite a bit of reconfiguring with the track. I'm going to have to get an extra set of return loops and do one there, and because I will be adding even more track because I have this spare track to use, I've decided I'm going to buy an extra motor unit as well. So hopefully when that arrives and I have the extra return loop in, I will use this track here, which was obviously used for that corner before. I'll extend it over here a little bit to make the track just ever that slightly longer, and then I can put a motor unit in perhaps here, which is roughly about halfway, and hopefully I won't get any more problems because there'll be double the thrust, there'll be less resistance on this corner, there'll be a little bit more track, but I'm hoping that's going to be solving the issues. I do want to invest in this project and I want to make it work, so I'm happy just to spend a little bit more money on it just so I get things right. So I'm going to leave you here and I will rejoin you when this is all different and I've rerouted it and I've sanded it all down. I'm going to have to take all of this out, sand it all flat again, and then just completely redo it with the new motor, well, the extra motor and the return loops. Hello, welcome back. It's been around a week since I got on this, as I've been on holiday and then had a very busy weekend with social events. In the end, I ended up buying a complete second starter set because, number one, the return loop extension sets and the motor wasn't in stock, and for the price of £85 they were together. The starter set's 170, so for an extra £95, so £85 you'll get the return loops and another motor, and then you get also the sliders and some more track and some more chain. So I just thought it'd be worth it rather than waiting. So here we have our alternate route now. You see where the original loop was, that is now a return loop there, and then I've expanded the track slightly to have a broader curve. You see where the original was, and then that is where our second motor unit is now housed, roughly halfway around the track. I couldn't think of many better places to put it. And then we've also come further in and further out, so there is a little bit more track and more or less follows the same route, but hopefully now we've got a lot more propulsion and we shouldn't get that issue with the skidding. So I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm just going to get the card stuck back down, get some sliders on it, and then put some go-karts on the sliders. I'm going to split this video into two parts. Part 1 will be the installation of the Magnorail, and part 2 will cover the scenic side of this area. So we're not far off the end of this video. Just as a test run, I'll show you it does work. I've put the paint pots on the return loop discs because they have a tendency to pop out. I'm not going to run it for too long because the chain is a little bit fiddly if it pops out. So yes, card will go back down and then I will join you with some footage as to how it is going after that is finished. Right, some good news. The addition of the second motor and the replacement of the first curve with the return loop has made considerable difference. I now have 7 sliders on the track which are running smoothly without jumping. They have not stopped once yet, so I could even go and get the full 10. Now that I have some more magnets too, I can replace the initial sliders that I'd lost somewhere. But for now, 7 is okay. So I'm going to leave this video here and then we'll return in part 2 where we cover the scenic side of creating this scene. So for the last thing, I'm just going to stick some of these go-karts here with some tacky wax onto these sliders to get you an idea of how this is going to look when it's all finished. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in part 2 for this video.